Who's the Boss turned a simple fish-out-of-water setup into one of television's most memorable experiments in family and gender roles. Premiering in 1984, it brought Brooklyn-born former ball player Tony Melly to suburban Connecticut, where Tony Danza's Tony became live-in housekeeper to Judith Light's advertising executive Angela Bauer. With Katherine Helmont's uninhibited Mona Robinson forever crashing the party, Alyssa Milano's Samantha Melly growing up on camera, and Danny Pintaro's Jonathan Bauer navigating childhood in the middle of it all, the series asked, what happens when you swap every traditional role in the house and let the audience decide who's really in charge? Across 196 episodes over 8 seasons, the show evolved from a risky network bet into comfort TV for an entire generation, replayed endlessly in syndication, and even reinvented overseas. Behind the laugh track and cozy Connecticut colonial was a saga of nervous executives, abandoned spin-offs, lost episodes, rewrites shaped by real-life identities, and a cast that didn't always agree with how the story was being told or how it ended. In the mid-1980s, American television ran on safe formulas, and Who's the Boss walked into ABC with a pitch that overturned all of that in a single sentence. A former professional athlete becomes a live-in male housekeeper for a high-powered single mother. Creators Martin Cohan and Blake Hunter envisioned Tony running the domestic sphere while Angela steered a successful advertising career. To ABC executives, it looked like potential career suicide. A man in an apron, a woman as the family breadwinner, and kids thriving in a house where every traditional role was reversed raised one central fear. Would middle America reject it? The network worried about sponsors pulling out and viewers turning away, pressing the creators for assurances that audiences wouldn't revolt. But Cohan and Hunter held their ground, convinced the culture had already shifted. When the show premiered in September 1984, the gamble paid off. Instead of backlash, viewers embraced the Melly Bauer household, and the very premise that had made executives reach for aspirin became the engine for 8 seasons of storytelling. Before the show ever aired, it almost went by a very different name. You're the Boss. No question mark, no ambiguity, just a pointed statement at Angela Bauer. On paper it seemed logical. Angela employed Tony, ran the agency, signed the checks, and owned the home he moved into. But the more the creative team sat with it, the more they realized it had quietly undercut their entire concept. That title gives away the answer before the pilot even begins, collapsing every character into a single static dynamic. Changing it to Who's the Boss, and adding that small but crucial question mark transformed a declaration into an ongoing conversation. The shift was made shortly before the fall 1984 premiere, late enough that promotional materials had to be reworked, but early enough to anchor the entire identity of the series. Over 8 seasons, the title framed every storyline, and even Judith Light, asked years later who really was the boss, refused to give a single answer. That one-word swap turned a premise into a question the series never definitively answered by design, with even the final episode refusing to settle it. In early drafts, Mona wasn't Angela's mother at all. She was written as her older sister. Martin Cohan and Blake Hunter initially imagined 2 adult sisters sparring over lifestyle choices, relationships, and money, one tightly wound and career-focused, the other free-spirited and impulsive. But in casting sessions, the search for the right age-appropriate actress kept coming up empty. Rather than force a miscast relationship, the creators aged Mona up and turned her into Angela's mother. That single structural change transformed everything, with the conflict now playing out across generations. Into that reimagined role stepped Katherine Helmont, bringing a mix of warmth, flirtation, and mischief that earned her a Golden Globe and multiple Emmy nominations. The character who nearly vanished in development became one of the defining figures of 80s television and a cornerstone of the show's identity. Judith Light's path to Angela Bauer wasn't guaranteed either. She had spent 6 years on One Life to Live and left that steady job in 1983 to chase prime-time work in Los Angeles, enduring months of promising auditions followed by quiet rejections. When she walked into the Who's the Boss audition, Tony Danza was already attached and reading scenes opposite potential Angelus. During one take, Light crossed the set in a robe and noticed Danza checking her out, a tiny moment not on the page. Instead of ignoring it, she stopped, looked him directly in the eye, and delivered an unscripted line. "What are you looking at?" It was quick, instinctive, and perfectly in character, assertive, unflustered, and ready to challenge Tony the moment he crossed a line. Producers instantly understood what they'd seen. That improvised question encapsulated Angela's core, and within a year of leaving daytime television with no safety net, Judith Light was anchoring a prime-time hit. Just 2 days before the premiere, Tony Danza's off-screen life looked very different from the wholesome image ABC was preparing to promote. In February 1984, he had been involved in an altercation with a security guard at a Manhattan hotel, leaving the guard with partial hearing loss. In late July, a jury convicted Danza of misdemeanor assault and criminal mischief, and he faced up to a year in jail. His attorney argued that incarceration would disrupt production, and on September 18th, just 48 hours before the premiere, the judge sentenced Danza to 250 hours of community service instead. "You took the law into your own hands," the judge told him. "You assaulted a man who was engaging in only one activity, that activity being to restore order." Danza told reporters, "I feel like a jerk." ABC didn't feature the story in its marketing. The coverage faded quickly, and by premiere night what mattered to viewers was the charming ex-player who folded laundry, cooked dinner, and tucked kids into bed. The opening notes of Brand New Life are inseparable from memories of the show, but across its run the lyrics sent two very different messages. In the first 2 seasons, the song opened with "There is more to life than what you're living," aspirational, but faintly judgmental, implying dissatisfaction for a sitcom selling itself as comfort viewing. By season 3, that line was revised to "There's a time for love and a time for living," leaning instead into warmth and balance. The vocalists changed too. Larry Weiss sang the original 1984 to 1986 version. Country singer Steve Wariner took over through 1990, and Jonathan Wolfe carried the final version through to the end. Each rendition subtly recalibrated the show's musical signature as the series evolved from culture clash comedy towards something more comfortable and lived in. It was a small adjustment, never announced on air, but for anyone hearing both versions back-to-back, it marked a telling shift in how Who's the Boss wanted to speak to its audience. By season 7, Alyssa Milano, who had joined the show at age 11, was visibly ready to move on. She was still under contract, and with ratings slipping, producers wanted one more season to give the story a proper send-off. Releasing her early would have made a final year nearly impossible to sustain. The contract held her through season 8, even as she made clear in interviews she was eager to showcase what else she could do. Within weeks of the finale wrapping in April 1992, she was already shooting the Amy Fisher story, a deliberately darker project chosen to reset her image. When the cancellation came, Milano openly welcomed it. For viewers, Samantha remained part of the family to the end. For Milano, that last season was a closing chapter she had already mentally turned the page on. Years after the series ended, Danny Pintaro, who played Jonathan from the pilot onward, opened up about his character's shrinking arc in the final seasons. Speaking on the Behind the Velvet Rope podcast in 2022, he reflected on something he hadn't fully understood at the time. "Everyone knew I was gay long before I did," he said, connecting that observation to how Jonathan was written later in the run. In the final few seasons, some more trauma was created for sure. "The producers didn't know what to do with me." He recalled appearing in scenes with little more than a line or two, wondering why there was no meaningful material. "It really sent me for a loop. It just made me feel not wanted." He came out publicly in 1997, 5 years after the show ended, when the National Enquirer threatened to out him, and looking back, he believes the writer's room may have sensed something about him they didn't know how to write around. The irony was stark. A show built on challenging gender norms had retreated into safer territory when faced with a young actor who didn't fit the standard prime-time mold. By the end of season 3, Mona had become such a standout that ABC commissioned a spin-off built around her, with a 2-part backdoor pilot crafted inside the show itself. In the planned series, Mona would move to Manhattan to help her brother run a struggling hotel. But when ABC watched the finished episodes, an unintended problem became impossible to ignore. Removing Mona from the main cast drained energy from the show they already had. Without her unpredictable entrances and generational tension, the dynamic between Tony, Angela, and the kids felt noticeably flat. The network backed away, the spin-off was quietly canceled before it aired, and producers hastily shot a scene writing her return home. Mona stayed exactly where viewers wanted her, barging in unannounced and serving as the show's perpetual agent of chaos. Who's the Boss also spawned another spin-off attempt when the Season 5 episode Living Dolls introduced Leah Remini alongside Vivica A. Fox as aspiring model Emily Franklin, serving as a backdoor pilot for a series about teen models. ABC ordered the show but then decided to recast, with Halle Berry replacing Vivica A. Fox and David Moscow replacing another cast member. The revamped Living Dolls premiered in September 1989 but lasted only 12 episodes before cancellation. For Halle Berry, it marked her first credited acting role, a stepping stone toward Boomerang, Jungle Fever, and an eventual Academy Award. Vivica A. Fox would find her own success in Independence Day and Kill Bill, and the two actresses later appeared together in Why Do Fools Fall in Love? The recasting saga became one of the more consequential casting shuffles in late-80s television history. The show's strong premise made it a natural candidate for international adaptation, and in the UK it resurfaced as the upper hand on ITV from 1990 to 1996, with baseball replaced by football and Connecticut suburbia giving way to Oxfordshire. Honor Blackman, best known as Pussy Galore in Goldfinger, took on the Mona equivalent role, transforming a Bond icon into a sitcom matriarch. Catherine Helmont herself appeared on the British version in 1993, but not as Mona. She played an entirely different character named Madame Alexandra while Blackman inhabited the Mona role, creating a strange meta-double exposure on screen. The British version even committed to the closure the American show refused to provide, marrying off its central couple and running for a 7th series with them as husband and wife across 94 episodes total. By Season 8, Tony Danza's appearance had noticeably changed because he had just finished playing a hardened mobster in the TV movie Dead and Alive, a role requiring a severe haircut that clashed with the soft domestic image audiences knew. Producers could have hidden the discrepancy with a wig, standard practice for the era, but instead chose transparency. The Season 8 premiere opened with Tony simply complaining about a terrible haircut, acknowledging the visual shift and turning it into a moment of character humor. It was a low-drama solution that reflected something larger about how the show operated across 8 seasons, repeatedly letting real-life details inform the scripts rather than pretending the people on screen existed separately from the people playing them. In January 2020, producers began developing a revival that would bring Tony Danza and Alyssa Milano back as father and daughter, set 30 years later, with Samantha now an adult single mother and Tony moving back in to help. Sony Pictures Television announced the project. Norman Lear was attached as executive producer, and Amazon Freevee eventually picked it up. But the COVID-19 pandemic disrupted development. Milano's struggle with long COVID affected her ability to work, and the 2023 writers' strike stalled progress further. By October 2024, The Hollywood Reporter confirmed the project was no longer in active development at Freevee, with Sony retaining rights but no new buyer materializing. 4 years of scripts and planning ended without a single frame of footage, mirroring the unresolved feeling the original series had always carried. By Season 7, with ratings slipping and ABC ready to wrap things up, the creative team pushed for one final season to give Tony and Angela the closure their relationship deserved. In Season 8, the two at last became a couple, and the original finale script went one step further, proposing a wedding to give the series a definitive romantic ending. That ending never aired. ABC worried a permanent marriage would damage the show's syndication value by eliminating the central tension that made reruns work. Tony Danza agreed with the decision, but for different reasons, feeling that resolving the title's open question with a wedding would flatten the show into exactly the kind of conventional ending it had always resisted. With both the network and its lead actor aligned against it, the wedding was scrapped. The finale that aired instead brought Tony back to Angela's doorstep, mirroring the pilot but layered with 8 seasons of shared history. Some fans felt cheated. Judith Light later called the bookend ending really lovely. Either way, the show closed exactly as it had opened, with the central question still hanging in the air, refusing to be answered, just as the title had always intended.